Thank you for joining us today. So as you likely know, according to our agenda, this is a shorter workshop today. So we will begin our workshop by directly jumping into the PSR equivalency presentation by Caltrans. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaden. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. There will be 4 presenters today. I'm Teresa McWilliam. I will be starting out, and I am the ATP Program Manager for the Northern 5 districts. And we've included a map here in case you are not familiar with the Caltrans district arrangement. Next slide, please. So our presentation will start with ATP background. We'll move on to the PSR equivalent purpose, then definition and requirements, engineer's checklist, non-infrastructure plans, and the Active Transportation Resource Center, or ATRC. We are going to hold all questions until the end of the presentation, so please do put your questions into the chat. And for those of you in the room, we'll be asking you to step up to the podium here to give questions so that everybody can hear you when you're speaking. Next slide, please. So for the ATP background, ATP was created by legislation in September of 2013 to encourage the increased use of active transportation modes. Next slide, please. So the ATP goals include increasing the proportion of walking and biking trips, increase safety and mobility for non-motorized users, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, enhanced public health, ensuring disadvantaged communities share in the benefits, and providing a broad spectrum of projects to benefit many types of active transportation users. So this language can be found in SB 99 of 2013. Next slide, please. So there are 4 types of ATP projects. Infrastructure, which is building of sidewalks, bikeways, other non-motorized facilities. Non-infrastructure, which is education, encouragement activities that further the program goals. We have combination projects, which are infrastructure and non-infrastructure. And we have plans, which are a standalone only. You cannot combine plans with any other kinds of work for the development of a community-wide bicycle, pedestrian, safe routes to school, or active transportation plan in a disadvantaged community. Next slide, please. So for the ATP application types, we have them broken out by funding. So for a small infrastructure or combo, that'd be 250,000 to 3.5 million. And for the small, you only have to answer 5 questions. For the medium infrastructure and combo, it's 3.5 million to 10 million. And for the medium, there are 7 questions. For the large infrastructure and combo, that's over 10 million, and there are 8 questions for the large application. For non-infrastructure, it can be any cost, and it can stand alone or be combined with an infrastructure project. And plans also are for any cost and must be a standalone and cannot be combined with any other application type. On next slide, please. So on the actual application scoring, this is from the scoring rubric, and the red circles do indicate where input will be given on whether or not the PSR equivalence we talk about today is met in your application. And so that is for the large infrastructure and medium and small, and the non-infrastructure, the scope and layout and consistency. So what that means, we've gotten applications where maybe one scope is discovered or discussed, but then the plans show something totally different, or that the limits have been changed greatly. So we realize there is a lot of work that goes into these applications, but quality check is very important. And then so for the implementation of the plans, just your plan description itself is where PSR comes into play. Next slide, please. So the purpose is that a completed ATP application must, by CTC legislation or guideline description, meet the PSR equivalent requirements. And so no new infrastructure will be programmed without completing a PSR or its equivalent. Next slide, please. So what do we need for a PSR equivalent. So the application serves as the PSR equivalent. The scope in the application at the time of programming is the approved project scope. So your application must be able to verify the scope, the schedule, and the cost estimate clearly. And we have to verify the deliverability and constructability also. And what we mean by that, railroads are typically very difficult to work with. And so if you say that you're going to get railroad permits in about 6 months, we tend to question that if you're just now starting out. So that sort of information will be reviewed. Again, if you have environmental, like with the Coastal Commission, those sorts of activities can take a much longer amount of time. So those will be looked at and commented on, and points can be reduced if there is concern about delivering your project. And then finally, the CTC's ATP guidelines state that new infrastructure, that I already said that. Okay. Moving on. Next slide, please. So the PSR and PSR equivalents vary in complexity and detail. However, the minimum acceptable level for ATP projects enables reviewers to verify that the plans and layouts, schedule, and estimated cost of the project are consistent with the written scope and narrative questions as evaluated, and that the application is awarded points for. Next slide, please. So here's just some information for the ATP program. So far, we have 1,262 projects. Of those, 515 are active and 684 have been completed. We have had 63 projects canceled for a total of $136 million. And that's a big part of what we're trying to keep from happening to projects with the PSR equivalent presentation and the information that we ask for in the application. Another thing that can take a lot of time is time extensions. So in cycle 1, we had 281, 240, 275, 180 in cycle 4, in cycle 5, 128, cycle 6, and on cycle 7, we've yet to have a time extension request. And scope changes. It's another area where it's a lot of work for everyone, and we would like to minimize and move forward with projects that appear not to have issues that would require scope changes. But we have had 117 approved, 3 denied, 15 major approved, and 32 withdrawn. The difference between the major and the minor is that the minor can be approved by CTC staff. A major scope change has to go before the commission, be approved by the commissioners. The difference there being so with the major, it's generally felt that some of the benefits that have been outlined in the application are now being removed, whereas if a minor can be anything, say, oh, in our estimate, we said we were going to do 20 ADA ramps, and now we're only doing 15. But any changes from your original scope requires a scope change request and approval by the commission. Next slide, please. So the next part we're going to discuss is the definition and the requirements. Next slide. So the project study report and project study report equivalents are engineering reports that are used to document agreement on the cost, scope, and schedule of a project that the project can be considered for inclusion in future programming documents. A feasibility study is not the appropriate programming document. The project's scope must be identified and defined, and feasibility studies are not eligible for ATP funding. Next slide, please. So the requirements, according to the adopted PSR guidelines, a PSR equivalent must consider consistency with statewide, regional, and local planning and potential environmental issues, including mitigation or hazardous waste. So environmental mitigation is an eligible item, but it does need to be acknowledged in your application and be part of your estimate in order to be funded by ATP. And when we're talking about consistency with statewide, regional, and local planning, if your agency has a route and it butts up against another agency's route, if you haven't had a conversation with them, by the time you get out to construction, they've now made a buffered class 1, and your plans, whatever they are, suddenly are running into their raised median divider or something like that. So there needs to be conversation with whoever it is that you're also adjacent to and working with to make sure that your project will still be a viable one by the time you get to construction. Next slide, please. So the PSR guidelines also state that the PSR equivalent must include at a minimum the need and purpose, the background and project history, the discussion of alternatives that satisfied the need and purpose and include project costs. That's part of our narrative. And again, the project estimate, the project cost for the approved project approval and document, PA&ED, plan specs and estimate, right-of-way and construction, construction management, and engineering for the construction phases. The project programming request or PPR form with all projects funding, with all of the projects funding, showing a fully funded project with a delivery schedule for all phases. That's the cost and schedule requirement. Maps, plan layouts, and cross sections that support the project description under supporting documents. Next slide, please. So again, when you're working on your application, all three of these items must dovetail and match. If your narrative saying one thing, your cost and schedule are showing other items, and your supporting documents look completely different, then it's definitely a problem and will likely get you deductions. Next slide, please. So the PSR equivalent definition requirements for the elements in the application. So we have part A of the application, and that is your agency information, who you are, where you're located, who our contact would be, the project description, project details, and I already mentioned the PPR. So all of the highlighted items are parts of the application that we will be reviewing that are involved with the PPR or PSR equivalent requirements. Under Part B, question 3 is again the funding and schedule. Part C has all of these attachments. Attachment B is the engineer's checklist. Attachment C is the project location map. Part D is the project layout plans, cross sections, which need to be showing existing and proposed conditions, the project estimate, and then any additional attachments that will help bolster your project's information. And another part of the Part C of the application is non-infrastructure work plan, or for a plan, the scope of work. Next slide, please. At this point, I'd like to hand the presentation to Elijah Hall.
Good morning. Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. I'm Elijah Hall, the ATP manager for the Southern Districts. Today, I will cover some of the engineer checklist attachments, and Cirilla will cover the remaining ones. Okay. So let's start. This section explains what the engineer checklist is and why it matters. Next slide, please, Jaden. The checklist verifies that the application includes all PSR equivalent documents in the infrastructure application. Also, it helps applicants prepare a complete PSR equivalent submittal. The documents must be signed and stamped by a California registered engineer. The checklist ensures that all PSR equivalent elements are included and the application is free of major errors and omissions, and the reviewers can score the project accurately without missing information. Next slide, please. The PE should verify the following information is correct and consistent. 1, the project location map. 2, the project layout plan. 3, the cross-section. 4, the project estimate. 5, the crash and safety data and countermeasures. 6, the project schedule, funding, and programming requests. 7, the warranty study and guidance. And then lastly, additional narrative and documents if provided. Next slide, please. Okay, the project location map is the first PSR equivalent document reviewers see and help understand the project. Let's review a couple examples of project location maps. Next slide, please. This is an example of a legible map showing the project limits of an applicant's jurisdiction. The map does not include unnecessary information. If landmarks were needed for this map, this would be a good location to show those landmarks for reference of the project to, say, the capital of a city or county. Next slide, please. Okay, here's an example of a project location map showing the project corridor and the overall alignment. The important boundaries and landmarks are displayed in this map. No unnecessary details are shown here. Uh, you can see a reference of the location to major cities. Next slide, please. So this is a clear example showing the work and reference lines and a project alignment. Reviewers can easily see that this project is located on state US 101, and the project is located within the state right away. Next slide, please. Okay, in this example, this map fails because it's a cluttered, complex, and does not clearly define the boundaries. It just shows a lot of lines, and the legend is crowded with a lot of unnecessary information in reference to the project. Reviewers cannot easily identify where the project is located and the scope of the project. Next slide, please. Okay, so quick tips for creating an acceptable project layout plans are use clear, unblurry maps, always show project limits and a legend if needed. Use simple line weights, avoid cluttered and unnecessary information. The project map should help reviewers better understand the application. Back to what Teresa said, that the application include the narrative and the PSR equivalent documents. Next slide, please. Okay, so a project layout, a plan, tells reviewers exactly what the project is. Next slide, please. Using the plan alone, evaluators should be able to understand the full scope of work. If you cannot, the rule of thumb is if you cannot understand the scope, we cannot either. Next slide, please. Okay. The layouts and plans must show the existing and proposed conditions, include a scale and north arrow, clearly depict existing and proposed right-of-ways, display the full scope of work, help define the limits of the preliminary outputs, use standard design and detailing practices. Next slide, please. This is example clearly shows the alignment, cross-section, and right-of-way of a project. Demonstrates a typical layout for an ATP project and includes the appropriate level of details. The example at the bottom is a good example, but you just need a cross-sections and right-of-way lines to clearly depict the improvements for that project. Next slide, please. Okay, the plan here shows a precise location of this project and how the proposed improvements fit within the right-of-way limits and display clearly the state right-of-way. And this is important in reference to this location as well as to inform the reviewer and Caltrans staff that a state highway impact assessment form is necessary for this project. Next slide, please. Okay, this example has too many lines and symbols, and the reference points are not well established. Reviewers cannot distinguish existing and proposed improvements. Items not included in the project should not appear in a plan, which this one shows various items that are not part of this ATP project. Next slide, please. This is an example of ADA improvements drawn without considerations of the steep terrain and major physical barriers. ATP cannot fund non-ADA compliant improvements, and non-standard details in design. Layouts must accurately reflect conditions, not concepts, as what's shown here. Next slide, please. This example shows a sidewalk improvement that removes a garage access. The estimate includes only $2,000 for right-of-way, which is not realistic. Quantities were based on 30% plans, which is not sufficient for a high level of accuracy. The layout must reflect the true conditions and the right-of-way impacts, and the estimate must include realistic costs. So they have $697,000 for this project, and given that the loss of garage access will probably be quite expensive, this is probably, the estimate is probably pretty low for the actual proposed project. Next slide, please. Okay, so best practices for creating a project layout and plan. Clearly label crosswalks, ramp locations, show improvements clearly, and consistent symbols. Identify the side of a road improvements occur. Display right-of-way lines and any required acquisitions. Label streets, utilities when relevant. Provide layouts for each location if multiple segments exist. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'll cover the cross-section requirements. So cross-section should show improvements, how they fit into the existing corridor. They are essential for feasibility, constructability, and enhance the reviewer's understanding of the proposed project. Next slide, please. Okay, cross-sections must show existing and proposed conditions, match the width shown in the layout and plans, include traffic lanes, shoulders, buffers, and sidewalk widths. Also show side slopes, drainage, and right-of-way considerations. Reflect real field conditions and constraints. They must also depict material depths of the proposed improvements if there's sectional changes throughout the layout. Next slide, please. Now I'll go over a few examples of some acceptable cross-sections and non-acceptable ones. Okay, so this is an example of acceptable use of cross lines in a layout sheet and provides corresponding cross-sections. Material changes and width modifications are clearly depicted in the sections that's provided, A, B, and then lastly, C. This level of clarity supports the project feasibility and constructability. Next slide, please. This is an example showing separate existing proposed sections because the sidewalk width has changed. Multiple sections help reviewers better understand the project and proposed improvements and existing conditions. So this one does a good job showing that before and after and how the sidewalk would change if the proposed improvement is built. Next slide, please. This is an example of proposed condition only and does not acknowledge the existing constraints and conditions. The project may require a retaining wall and drainage systems in order to construct the proposed improvement at this location. The required mitigation is a common engineering problem. Therefore, sections must realistically show the field conditions. Next slide, please. Okay, this section is not labeled with existing or proposed. The section does not appear in the corridor, and if right-of-way is required, it must be shown, and no right-of-way lines are shown. Right-of-way acquisitions and locations are missing if necessary for this project, which it appears to be. So more details are required for this project location. Next slide, please. Okay, so best practices for creating a cross-section detail. Show the width of all elements, lines, lane lines, buffers, sidewalks, parking. I use the correct sectional property depth for pavement and concrete. Show existing and proposed right-of-way lines. Demonstrate how new improvements tie into the existing slopes and edges and other considerations. Make sure the cross-section and layout matches the application. And that's what I have for the first part, so I'll pass this over to Cirillo to handle the last attachments.
All right. Morning, everyone. I'm Cirillo Zililican, and I'm the Caltrans headquarters ATP manager for the Central Districts. Thank you, Elijah. And I'll be walking you through the remaining engineers checklist items 4 through 8. I will begin with the next slide, please. I will begin with the project estimate. This item 4 of the checklist, and in my opinion, is every engineer's favorite task, since they get to take out their Casio and show off their Casio calculators. So yeah. So my goal in the next few slides here is to walk you through what is expected and the items to consider during the preparation of the project estimate. Next slide, please. Okay. PSR equivalent estimate. The PSR is a programming document, so the level estimate needs to match that type of document, right? On the right here is the current project estimate template. It's a snippet of it. And this will be provided as an Excel spreadsheet in the application. And this project estimate template must be utilized for all infrastructure projects. And also for reference, there is an instructions tab below that will take you to a sheet that provides additional guidance for completing the project estimate. Okay, let's talk about the first section of the project estimate. It's where you are able to input the project information, the information of the California Registered Professional Engineer, PE, responsible for the estimate. The PE must review the information presented in this estimate and verify that the items are consistent with the other elements shown in the application, for example, the project plans. The next section on the is the construction cost estimate. The construction cost estimate must utilize appropriate units and unit costs. Keep in mind, it is recommended to have escalation costs accounted for when you're inputting the unit costs here. So, you might have for example, a backup document or a backup estimate sheet, and you would want to, input the escalated costs based on the construction year of your project here. And since ATP does not fund cost increases, you would want to include those escalation costs. Only certain items can be used as lump sum. And there's a tab as well on the bottom of this sheet that kind of shows the typical items that are allowed to be shown as lump sum. So everything else should be shown appropriately as far as the unit, their appropriate units. Also, this section shows the non-ATP eligible / non-participating items. So in addition, the California Conservation Corps and local corps can be inputted here if known already, if they're able to help with the project and they inform you what type of work they're able to do. It can be inputted here. Okay. Some agencies may have their own guidelines for contingencies and as far as using it in the estimate. We do recommend that you have an appropriate contingency in the estimate. For example, what we've seen, and of course you have to verify it with your own agency. We've seen it between 20 to 30 typical as far as the estimate contingency at this level of an estimate. So that's just something you want to take a look into. Also, in this project estimate, right below shows the project delivery costs. These are the support costs. Your, you know, preliminary engineering, your right-of-way, support costs for utilities and acquisition, utility acquisition, and construction engineering costs, right? Also, please keep in mind to utilize escalation in these items, right? Your right-of-way may be 2 years later, so please account for escalation costs. Utilize that and have your escalated costs there. A last section of the project estimate is the documentation of, at the bottom, very bottom here, of the ATP eligible, non-participating slash participating, and ineligible slash non-participating costs, you know. There's some example shown here, and also there will be an example on the tab I mentioned earlier, the instructions tab. There's an example on how you would want to do a justification here. I also want to add, we say ATP eligible, participating, ATP ineligible, non-participating. I want to make sure it's clarified here. So if it's ineligible, it cannot be used as a leverage funding. In your application, there's going to be some questions about leveraging. It cannot be utilized as leverage funding. Although, if you do use it in this estimate, if you use leverage funding, you are able to put it as non-participating because it needs to be separated. Just want to, give the folks here a heads up, because at the end of this project estimate, it would be at the very bottom, it would show the ATP request and the non-eligible slash non-participating costs, right? So, and that should be matching the project programming request, which is the PPR, that's also included in the application. So please keep in mind that that needs to match. Next slide, please. Okay, let's see. Okay, it's a pretty good example of, an project estimate that shows itemized construction items with, appropriate units and also segregated non-eligible and eligible costs here based on percentages. And you're able to input those percentages in those columns, and it should automatically calculate the ineligible items costs. And again, this is likely going to get an update to show slash non-participating costs here and have more instructions in the tab about how to show the leveraging funding if they are shown in the eligible slash non-participating columns. Next slide, please. Okay, so looks like I have the example here about the documentation. So here's an example of a documentation for a non-eligible item. For example, roadway paving, right? Typically on the vehicle travel lanes, that type of work is non-eligible for ATP. So you want to make sure that that is in the ineligible column. And here's a justification, an example justification, how you would document that at the bottom of that estimate. So, you may use, appropriate linear footage or square footage percent wise, and that's how you would arrive with your cost segregation. In addition, going back to the estimate, there is a section there for support costs. Typically, there's a certain maximum percentage for construction engineering um, and PE costs. So you want, if it's over the maximum that it showed there, you're able to also document it here, and the instructions would give you that information again. Next slide, please. Okay, all right. Okay, so lump sum items. Okay. All right, so it's another good example of an estimate here. Um, and it's just showing you that tab that I mentioned earlier about the allowable lump sum items. Use that as a reference, please. And the next slide, please. Here's an example of that where an estimate utilized lump sum units for all the construction items, and that's a potentially could cause the application to lose some points. Because that's the requirement is we able to look at the estimate and the plans and see where, then compare them, right? As a reviewer. Next slide, please. All right. A few lessons learned on the project estimate. So one thing is, show the cost for each phase, regardless of the funding sources. As I mentioned earlier, if it's you're able to do the non-participating column, right? For if you have any local funds or other funds, you can utilize that to show that. You want to segregate eligible and non-eligible costs. Do not use lump sum items, lump sum for all the items. Account for NEPA. Like this is one thing. Like if your project is $1 million or more construction costs, account that it may get federal funding. So, in your P&ED, you might want to account for support costs or any other costs that you need for a NEPA, right? To clear NEPA. Another thing, a railroad mitigation, utility relocation. During this time, you may be, it's recommended that you reach out to those stakeholders, maybe take a look at, potential costs. You maybe have already known cost sharing for your utility companies, right? Account for those utility relocation costs for any cost sharing that the agency may have. One big item again is cost escalation. Please do account for the inflation and cost escalation, and the program does not have a standard cost escalation rate, so we leave that to the agencies in the region, and based on the data they have as far as their projections or what they're getting, we leave it to them to figure out their own escalation and then input that in the estimate. So. And again, project programming requests, needs to be in line with what's in the project programming. It will be compared. The estimate will be compared with the PPR. I think that is it for the project estimate. Let's next slide, please. All right. So item 5 of the engineer's checklist is crash and safety data collision maps and countermeasures. So these are discussed in part B of the right now of the application under narrative questions. Next slide, please. So the application must show crash data accurately, a map layout shown to scale, and occurred within the area of the proposed improvements. The Transportation Injury Mapping System, TIMS ATP tool, developed by UC Berkeley. Thank you, Ali. Just want to make sure. Developed by UC Berkeley Safe Transportation Research and Education Center, SafeTrek. It's a free tool. And it's available for use to access California crash data. So yeah, that's if you don't have access to available tools, there's available tools. And this tool can be found in the Active Transportation Research Center website, ATRC, which my teammate Ali will talk about the ATRC later. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's it for that section. I'll go to item 6, which is project schedule, project funding, and programming requests. These are parts right now, based on the previous application, these are parts A5, A6 of the application. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a sample project development and delivery timeline. So the programming period for ATP is 4 years, right? So it's not exact, but it is an example. So you have if you're getting P&ED, PS&E right away in construction, for example. So you'll have your P&ED here. This is where your environmental clearance is, right? It's like clear your environmental, and you have your preferred alternative, which is your scope. And then the next phase would be your PSNE and right away, and then next after that is construction. So what you have is the P&ED. So you when you get allocated for P&ED, you complete P&ED and clear the required environmental document prior to being able to move forward in requesting allocation for the next phase of PSNE or right away or both. And that's as shown here on this slide. PSNE and right away can happen concurrently, so you can request them concurrently. It's very common, right? As we know, those two go hand in hand a lot of times as far as their schedules. And then after that, with PSNE, right, you're not able to request construction prior to, final plans and also clearing your right of way. So that would be prior to construction, get those completed, cleared, and then you can request allocation. And if you see here in this 4-year programming period, right, the P&AD to con allocation potentially can take 4 years. And then when you allocate construction, the standard is you get up to 3 years for completing the project. Yeah. And there's a note below, there's also a timely use of funds guidelines tables, and then it talks about, some of these timelines and the requirements for, expenditures and invoicing and all that stuff for these phases. Next slide, please. Okay, some considerations here for the project schedule, funding, and programming requests. So, take a look at your schedule, as construction schedule, as far as when you're thinking your season is for that project, and work back, and then account for a lot anticipated windows, right, for a specific project requirements. And sometimes we've learned that, sometimes you go work on a bridge over a river or a creek, and maybe there's a construction window, right, that you're able to perform that type of work. So take a look at those. If you're able to also take a look at your, how you're advertising and how you're bidding, or does the city or agency have to go to the board or the council, right? Try to take a look at those timelines as far as your construction, your advertisement, and award, and take a look at the, because there will be deadlines, right? And for the timely use of funds, right? So Another thing is take a look at if the project is multi-funded. Try to coordinate the project's funding and schedules with that, and just try to take a look at that ahead of time as far as those other funding sources. Also, account for allocation, CTC allocation in the schedule. And then it needs to be, right now, I think on this preparation calendar for requesting allocations, it's about 60 days prior to an upcoming CTC meeting. So the things that are coming in to today's and tomorrow's meetings, the agencies have submitted their allocation requests 60 days, ago. Yeah, so for more information, there's the Caltrans Office of California Transportation Commission Liaison website, and in there, as I mentioned earlier, there's a preparation calendar that can help with take a look at the schedules for allocations. So this would be really good to have when you're preparing your schedule, because you will see the requirements and kind of like the timelines you need as far as, oh yeah, if I'm having a P&ED schedule here, I do need to take a look at this schedule. I need to complete it, and I won't be able to allocate and get reimbursable work until this time, right? So take a look at that. Next slide, please. Okay, so a few of the lessons learned for schedules and funding and programming. So, and as mentioned earlier, if your project is construction cost is 1 million or more, assume federal funding. So NEPA, right? Account for Caltrans district coordination with that, right? There's some timeline for review. So please do account for that. Technical studies, PSR equivalent, you should have some idea of what you're going to be, expecting. As you don't know everything, but you have some ideas based on, the general area of the project, right? Take a look at your technical studies that you might need. Clearances, Army Corps engineers may have some clearances required, Coastal Commission, Resource Board, Fish and Wildlife. Take a look at those and take a look at their timelines and their turnarounds for review. And also, don't skip the engagements. Community engagement is important, right? As the project, you're implementing the project, the community, you need to engage the community, get their support, and then, so the project scope can move forward, and then in construction, hopefully no issues, right? And the community supports the project. Take reach out to the other stakeholders, public transit, emergency responders, right? Their project, get their input. And if you're able to, and hopefully got some good relationship with your utilities in your area, able to take a look at their schedules and potentially verify your cost sharing, like I mentioned earlier in the estimate, right? Maybe there's a 50-50 cost share, or it's all on the utilities or whatever. So please do take a look at that. And I think that's all I have for item 6. Next slide, please. Okay, item 7 is warrant studies and guidance. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. This is, if applicable, is attachment, or currently attachment K in the application. So these are next slide, please. These are studies like, for example, your signal, right? If you need a new traffic signal, you'll need a warrant. So these are these types of studies that you can put in that attachment, um, please do include that in your application. And also, please keep in mind again, a registered California PE needs to be listed and you know, and licenses it needs to be is required there. So, next slide, please. Okay, so item 8, which is the last item of the engineer's checklist, is additional narration and documentation. So this is also can be included in attachment K of the application. Next slide, please. So I think Teresa may have mentioned earlier at that, that in application text and the narrative questions needs to be consistent, right? With estimate plans. So here you would, if there's anything that maybe doesn't fit in the narrative questions that you want to add more information on, this is your opportunity to provide that, engineer logic or any type of calculations or maybe some explanation of further explanation on the narrative. So, and it's also if there's anything that's innovative that the agency is doing as far as active transportation that they want to add in here, it's good to put in here, and any other maybe explanation of maybe non-standard items or something that's a little bit different that we're seeing right now as far as the active transportation features. You're able to put it in here too. I think that's all I have for that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is not part of the this is not part this section is not part of the PSR equivalent per se, but these are kind of project implementation. So talk about project amendments here. Next slide. So, PSR equivalent, should account for known risks at the time at the application, right? So we don't know everything. PSR it's a programming document. We try to get cost, schedule, scope, right? And then with that said, even with all the proper planning and scheduling, there's risk, and there's environmental delays, there's right away, and other conflicts, right? And if it does arise, the agency should communicate early, right? This is now, you know, and the recommendation is your first line of contact would be your district, Caltrans districts. Yeah. So, and unforeseen delays may require, project amendments. And with that, I can pass it to Elijah for some other notes on the next slide about project amendments. You may be able to add some more information on that.
Thank you, Cirillo.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you, Cirillo. Next slide, please. Okay, there are four main types of project ATP amendments. I go over three of them, three of the ones in the specific guidance, as well as a time extension. So the first one is a scope change. These are for changes of work described in your original application. May be considered by the commission if the proposed scope still meets the ATP project intent. Teresa covered the scope change information as well as the scope of a project earlier. Then again, the ATP does not fund cost increase. Let's see, the next project amendment is a funding distribution change. This request is for shifting funds between phases without increasing the overall program amount. And then the last program amendment that's listed in the guidelines is projects segmenting. This is splitting a project into multiple deliverable pieces. It's only allowed if each segment independently meets the ATP goals. And then lastly, a time extension, which is not truly a program project amendment listed in the guidelines. This is requested to extend the programmatic deadlines if an unforeseen condition is encountered during project implementation. Let's see, and the request must demonstrate efforts to deliver the project and justify the delay. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that's all we have for the attachments for the application. Next, we'll pass it over to Ali to cover the non-infrastructure.
Great. Thank you so much, Elijah. And good morning, everyone. My name is Alidor Westbrook, and I'm the ATP Non-Infrastructure and Plan Program Manager, as well as the Active Transportation Resource Center Project Manager. Next slide, please. So per the definition of non-infrastructure, or NI, in the ATP guidelines, NI is education and encouragement activities that further the goals of the ATP. Projects can be NI only or infrastructure and NI. We call that combination projects. This includes NI projects benefiting school students, older adults, or entire communities. NI projects can be startup programs or new components of existing programs. However, the CTC intends to focus NI funding on startup programs in which no program currently exists. And for a project with new components added to an existing program, the applicant must demonstrate how the original program is continuing without ATP funding because ATP cannot fund existing or ongoing program operations. The reason for this is because we want to expand the breadth of NI programming and encourage communities who have never had NI programming to have the opportunity to implement it. All NI projects must demonstrate how the program is sustainable and will be continued after ATP funding is exhausted. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of NI activities. Bike and walk audits, bike and walk skill classes, walk and bike to school or work days, bike and walk safety education at community events, student and parent safety patrols, crossing guard programs, temporary demonstration projects, and safe walking and biking media campaigns. As a reminder, please note that NI is programming, that is education encouragement, and not public engagement for an infrastructure project. These NI examples and more can be found at the Active Transportation Resource Center and within the ATP guidelines, which will be updated from the last cycle. Next slide, please. Now we'll get into the PSR equivalent details for a non-infrastructure project, whether standalone or the NI piece of a combo project. The current attachment G of the application is the NI work plan, called the Exhibit 25R. It's an Excel spreadsheet which is available on the Caltrans and CTC ATP web pages. Just note that the current attachment is the form from cycle 7, and it may have some slight changes for cycle 8. So when the call for projects is open, do ensure that you're using the correct form. The 25R is the NI project scope, which if awarded, the project applicant will be accountable for delivering. It's important because it outlines tasks, deliverables, schedule, and cost associated with the NI project. The 25R is also our way of verifying deliverability and compliance with the NI guidelines. So here is what needs to be included. Make sure what you describe in the narrative of the application is included in the 25R. Caltrans does cross-check the narrative with the 25R, and we have seen some applications that describe certain activities in the narrative, and then when we look at the 25R, it's not listed or is a bit vague and not well defined. Also, make sure you establish any partnering commitments with other agencies or entities, such as schools, school districts, or local public health departments prior to submitting the application. This may be especially true on a combination project, when a city or county might be the applicant, and then a public health department might be implementing the non-infrastructure work. This is important because we have seen applications that come in stating a partnership agency for the NI work, and then once funded, the applicant then asks the partner and they're unable to be involved. So now the applicant has to do a scope change. So again, just a reminder, please make sure all of your commitments are made prior to submitting an application. Another note is that the NI projects can use consultants, nonprofits, or community-based organizations to do their non-infrastructure work. If you choose to do this, once funded, the work will need to be competitively bid, so specific consultants or nonprofits cannot be identified within your application. We know this causes some concern for non-infrastructure work, but it is a state requirement, so we'll continue to work towards allowing more flexibility when possible, but this is something that is much bigger than the active transportation program. Be sure to reference and use the ATP NI guidance for eligible expenditures under the ATP. This is probably the most common cause of our comments on applications. For example, we must ensure the spending on safety incentives for participation isn't excessive or wasteful. So items need to have a purpose, be under a maximum cost, and have some limitations to how they are given out. The NI guidance also has sections on staff cost, travel costs, materials, and more. Also note that we have appendices in the NI guidance for media campaigns, open streets and demonstration projects, and helmet distribution criteria. So be sure to review that as well if your project entails any of these components. Next slide, please. The next 3 slides break up the 25R into scope, cost, and schedule, and give some tips on what to include for each. For scope, break up the entire project into overarching tasks, each a different tab on the Excel form. Then, on each task, break it down further into individual activities. This is where we look for the activities to be consistent with what is described in the narrative. Be detailed and specific. Quantify the number of activities and state tangible deliverables. For example, instead of listing bicycle rodeos as an activity, you should state, conduct 6 bicycle rodeos for 4th and 5th graders, 2 per year, 3 years of the project, over 3 years of the project. As you can see, this gives us much more context and displays exactly how it will be delivered. Make sure you can commit to what you write, as this will be what you're held accountable for. And if you have any more details you want to explain, be sure to list those in the task notes section. Next slide, please. Now for costs. Okay. Ensure the total cost of the 25R matches the PPR and application cover page. Ensure compliance with NI guidelines. It's really important as this is typically where we find issues. The 25R asks for staff time cost, include agency and partner staff costs, and TBD consultant staff budget if you will be going out for bid. In the tab called Other Costs, be sure to include all anticipated costs for travel, equipment, supplies, materials, incentives, and other direct costs. These categories match the NI guidance, so again, double check those sections for what is eligible. Throughout all tasks, indicate if any costs are coming from a source other than the ATP. Next slide, please. All right, moving on to the schedule. Ensure the schedule on the 25R matches the PPR and application. Safe routes to school projects will need to coordinate with school schedules. For combination projects, think about if the non-infrastructure tasks need to coordinate with the infrastructure schedule. For example, will the safety classes and encouragement activities be in preparation for the new improvements, or will it come after the improvements are in place to encourage use of the new facilities? Please note again that NI is not public engagement for infrastructure project. Every cycle, we do see about 1 or 2 combination applications that don't understand this, and so unfortunately the NI work gets disqualified, which may impact your score since it's no longer a combination project. Next slide, please. All right, moving on to plans. Next slide. So per the definition of a plan in the ATP guidelines, a plan is the development of a community-wide bicycle, pedestrian, safe routes to school, or active transportation plan that encompasses or is predominantly located in a disadvantaged community. The first priority of funding will go to applicants that have neither of these 4 types of plans. The second priority of funding will go to eligible applicants that may have one type of plan, but not all. The third priority for the funding of plans will be for updates to active transportation plans that is more than 5 years old. The lowest priority for the funding of a plan will be for updates to an active transportation plan that is 5 years old or less. The reason for this is because we want to encourage agencies that do not have any sort of active transportation plan to apply to complete one. As a plan is such an important step in order to apply for and construct community-driven active transportation projects in the future. Note that a plan is a standalone project type and cannot be combined with any other project type. We have seen applicants try to combine a plan with NI or a plan with infrastructure, but that is not currently allowed within the ATP. Next slide, please. Okay. Now we'll get into the PSR equivalent details for a plan. The current attachment H of the application is the plan scope of work, called the Exhibit 25 Plan, or 25P. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It may be updated slightly over the next few months, so be sure to get the most recent version when applying for Cycle 8. The 25P is the plan project scope, which if awarded, the applicant will be accountable for delivering. It's important because it outlines tasks, schedule, and costs associated with the plan development. The 25P also allows us to verify compliance with the ATP guidelines plan components in the current Appendix A. So here's what needs to be included. Be sure that what you describe in the narrative of the application is included in the 25P. Caltrans does cross-check the narrative with the 25P, and we have seen some applications that describe certain activities in the narrative, and then when we look at the 25P, it's not listed. For example, community engagement is a big piece of the planning process. So in the application question, the applicant describes doing community surveys, tabling at farmers markets, and other existing community events, having an interactive feedback website. However, when we read the 25P, it doesn't list any of this. So the takeaway is that to make sure you're really consistent between what you put in your application and what you put in the 25P. Also, be sure to include the plan component sheet, which is one of the tabs in the 25P. All this entails is check marks to ensure the required components are included in the plan, and if they are not, all we need is a brief explanation as to why they are not included. This doesn't impact your score if you don't include all the components, but we want to ensure they were all considered. This is something that we've noticed over the cycles that it is missing from application, so we wanted to flag that for folks. Finally, be sure to include key planning process tasks, such as existing conditions analysis, robust community engagement, project prioritization, and an implementation plan. Note that plans and planning documents cannot go beyond a 30% conceptual design. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides break up the 25P into scope, cost, and schedule, and give some tips on what to include for each. For the scope, you'll want to break up the project into overarching tasks, each row with a blue color on the form. Then break each task into individual subtasks. Be detailed and specific in the task description. Again, make sure it matches what is written in your narrative. And then on the far right column, you will need to select the components the tasks will address from the drop-down menu. These components match the project component sheet I mentioned earlier. In one tab of the 25P, we provide a sample scope for your reference. Do not copy the sample scope of work. Your project is unique. Unfortunately, every cycle we do receive a few applications that use the exact sample scope of work as their scope, and it's pretty obvious to us. So just make sure that your scope of work is unique to your project. Okay, next slide, please. And now for cost. Ensure the total costs on the 25P match the PPR and application. Include the anticipated costs for each subtask and indicate if any costs are coming from a source other than the ATP. For schedule, ensure the schedule on the 25P matches the PPR and application. This is currently in section A5. Be sure to include the start and end dates for each task. Next slide, please. All right, now we're going to proceed to wrap up summary and some takeaways.
Thank you, Ali. So next slide, please. So I think one of the big points we want to highlight is because some of these, there were the pictures earlier with the driveway and all that, and there was the drawing, and we were like, did they actually go out and look at it? Because you kind of feel like they didn't. So I want to say go out and look, because if you're looking at it from Google Earth or you're looking at old plans, you're like, yeah, that'll fit. Then you get out there and realize there's a hill. So please go out, walk your site, take all appropriate staff. So maybe you need a maintenance person or a right-of-way, environmental. And again, we are having scope changes that are coming, or the neighbors have decided they don't want the neighborhood roundabout, or the neighbors don't want you taking out their landscape and things like that. So find out who your stakeholders are and who could have control over a situation that you didn't realize. I realize it's kind of hard sometimes to find those people, but try and reach out, let people know the project's coming so you can get a good project and not have to go back and do scope changes. So all three of the elements must be consistent. We just really can't push on that point enough, because there's always one or two that come in and you're like, it looks like they started out thinking they were going to do this and they switched to that, but they haven't gotten all their ducks back in a row. So quality control and really keeping track of when you make a change that you've captured at every place so that there's no confusion. The scope and the application at the time of the programming is the approved scope, and changes will require a scope change approval. And so one of the things that I've been seeing a lot on scope change requests is, oh yeah, we said we were going to do 20 ADA ramps, but now we're only doing 15. We just didn't count right. You're kind of like, how hard is that? So yeah, so if you're like, it's somewhere between 15 and 20, you really do yourself a favor and just say 15, because you come back in and say, we're doing 20. We're like, yay. Come back in going, we couldn't count right. We're kind of like, really? So please, round down if you're in doubt. Community engagement, ensure that the project meets the community's needs and wants, because they can really be a project impactor in the end. Ensure that the plans show where and what the project elements are that are proposed. And when in doubt, reach out. We can talk to you to a certain point about your project. Your district people are certainly way more familiar with the locations locally and local opinions, things they've seen on other projects. So they are someone that you want to reach out to. And again, if your project is abutting up against another agency, you need to find out and make sure that what you're proposing, that they're not going to be having widened sidewalks and now your project kind of looks weird next to theirs, or if there's other issues of that sort. So next slide, please. So things that you need to worry about for infrastructure projects, your utilities seem to be, oh, am I turning over to you? No. Okay, so I'm like, wait a minute. So utilities are important. They can, again, end up being a problem on your project if you're not on top of them. Drainage infrastructure modifications, again, they're expensive. So make sure that you think about whether, if there's no drainage there now, maybe you need drainage. Driveway conforms. We have had a couple of projects now that are having issues because turning radii weren't included for emergency vehicles and that sort of thing. That does need to be addressed, and your project does need to be able to account for those. Conflict points at intersections and level of traffic stress are all items that need to be considered. So Back to you, Ally.
So, next slide, please. Great. All right. So some takeaways for non-infrastructure projects. Complete your 25R with your specific and unique project. This is your scope. So make sure it's what you, the work that you put in there is what you want to deliver. Application narrative and 25R must be consistent. Make sure your project aligns with the goals of the ATP, and we talked about that earlier in the presentation. Check eligibility of items by looking at the NI guidance. Really encourage prior to even drafting your application, look at the guidelines for what is eligible. We're starting to get quite a few requests for ineligible activities, and so make sure that you're reviewing the NI guidance, you're familiar with what is in there, and then I think that will just make your project more successful. Be specific, quantify as much as possible in your 25R. I think we hit home on that, but just another friendly reminder. Establish public entity partnerships before application submittal. And when in doubt, reach out. So for non-infrastructure and plan projects, we have a ATP NI inbox, which is linked in these slides and will be posted on the ATP Commission page. So just really encourage anyone considering to submit a non-infrastructure application to reach out to us if you have any questions at all. Next slide, please. Okay, key takeaways for a plan. Complete your 25P with your specific and unique project. Application narrative and 25P scope must be consistent. Make sure, yeah, these are a lot of the same things. So just want to say, be consistent. It's so important. And we are here to help you if you have any questions whatsoever. I'll also just point out on the Caltrans ATP page, we have project profiles of previously awarded non-infrastructure plan projects and infrastructure projects. So that's a great starting point, as well as see what other people have done for their ATP projects and learn from them. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm happy to cover this if you'd like. Okay, so we just wanted to highlight a few different project design resources for you. The California Highway Design Manual, or sorry, the Caltrans Highway Design Manual, the Design Information Bulletin. I know a really useful one for active transportation projects is DIB 94. Also DIB 89, which is our separated bikeway guidance. So just wanted to link those for you all here. There's the FHWA Bikeway Selection Guide and NACTO, the National Association of California, or sorry, yeah, I should know this. Transportation officials, there we go. They have just a ton of different design guides. So if you're looking for additional resources. As far as training opportunities go, at the ATRC, we offer an Introduction to Active Transportation Planning and Design course. Just held that training yesterday here in Riverside. We'll be doing a few more at the start of the new year. So if you click on this link or visit the ATRC website, you can see when those trainings will be offered. We'll have in-person and fully virtual opportunities available. And then also in here is a Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian, or STEP resource page that's managed by USDOT. And then lastly, just wanted to point out the non-infrastructure common activities fact sheet that is available on the ATRC website. Next slide, please. Okay, because today's PSR equivalent training is a little bit shorter than we usually provide for you all. All of us here, the ATP PMs at Caltrans, will be offering office hours in January, February, and March of next year. So if you have additional questions that we aren't able to address today, or maybe you have colleagues that weren't able to participate, encourage you to join our office hours. We'll be advertising that through the ATRC mailing list, which is a monthly newsletter that we send out, focused all on the ATP and active transportation topics here. So yeah, we'll be advertising that, and we'll probably post it on our Caltrans Cycle 8 webpage as well, just so folks can find it. Next slide, please. All right. We told you several times to contact us, so we just want to make sure you know where to find that information. Starting up top is your district ATP coordinator. So every Caltrans district has an ATP coordinator, and this link here will let you know who those folks are. So it might be different than who you worked with for Cycle 7, so encourage you to check out this new link. We try to make sure that it is up to date. I think we're kind of checking it like monthly now at this point. So yeah, if you have questions or just want to connect with your district ATP staff, it's a good place to start. We've also linked the local assistance contact. So this is your local assistance area engineer or DLAE, as we often call them. So those current contacts are on the second link. And then lastly, we have all of our contact information and the districts that we support. For non-infrastructure and plans, I work across the state, so don't have to worry about what districts I can help. I can help wherever you're at in California. Next slide, please. Oh, questions. Great. All right, well, we have about 30 minutes left for questions. We'd love to hear from you. It looks like Jaden will be handling that. So over to you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And as a reminder, the materials from this workshop will be available on the CTC's website. So first, we will begin with some of our online written questions. Thank you all for your participation today. I believe this first question may be directed towards CTC staff. So the first question we have is, do other funding programs overseen by CTC allow for PSR equivalents, or is this only for ATP funding?
So I'm happy to jump in, but Cirilla or Teresa or Elijah, if you want to start the answer.
You should be unmuted, Cirillo.
Yeah, I'll take it. You got it. Okay. Yeah, okay. So the only other program that I'm aware of is the STIP. They have a PSR equivalent requirement for programming. So if there's other programs that I'm not aware of, CTC staff, if you can assist with answering that question.
Thanks, Elijah. So I did check with our SB1 team when this question came in, and because I wasn't sure. So what I got is the PSR equivalent is acceptable for SB1 programs, but if a project gets programmed, the applicant or implementing agency will need something more formal to be included in the baseline agreement. And that was the answer I got there. And I'm not sure if you want to talk about any requirements for on-system projects, if they're different. But that was what I had to add.
Yeah, if it's a non-system project for ATP, then the coordination needs to happen with the districts because they have different requirements as far as the level of oversight, or even if they need to actually have Caltrans project manager be involved or lead that side of things on the Caltrans side.
I was just going to add something on that. This is, I have this microphone. Can you hear me? Okay. So this is Lori Waters. I'm the programming, one of the programming deputies at the commission. And one of the differences with the ATP and the SB1 programs is most of the SB1 programs don't fund pre-construction. So that's why it's so important with the ATP that the application is a PSR equivalent, because a lot of times the agency hasn't done their environmental and design, but we need to know enough about the project to know what it is, so to see if it's a viable project.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Lauren Ledbetter. She asks, if a project is on the Caltrans system and led by a local agency, will a PSR equivalent be sufficient, or will Caltrans require a full PSR/PID document?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think our experience is the a lot of times that the requirement will be there because it needs to um, circulate within the district. So, my recommendation is reach out to your district and also review their PD, PDPM, PDPG, PDPM or PDPG. I'm getting it mixed up, but take a look at that document and then it kind of explains the level of document you need for a type of a project. So my first recommendation is reach out to your district and try to figure out like, hey, this is where my limits are. This is the anticipated construction costs. These are the impacts. Um, we plan this and that, or do we need to go through and follow what's in the Caltrans guidance or manuals as far as the PSR?
Thank you, Cirillo. Our next question, for right-of-way acquisition, what/where is the appropriate way to indicate methodology, potentially including donations of land or easements by private property owners?
So I think that needs to go into your non-participating column in the estimate. You're able to, on the estimate, there's a column for right-of-way acquisitions, and I think it does have um, the area for non-participating. So you're able to put it there, and if you're have opportunity to add a comment on that, you're able to also add that at the bottom in the justification section. If you would add a sentence or two about that. Yeah, but it should be non-participating if that's the case.
Thank you, Cirillo. Our next question comes from Pawanjit Dillon. He asks, what escalation rate should we use for escalation? Is there a specific rate for bid items and for right-of-way?
Okay. I mentioned earlier that, we leave it to the agencies and, other programs may have some standard escalation rates. I gotta go back to it, but I believe maybe the Highway Bridge Program, it's a federal program, may have some standard escalation rates. But ATP does not. We leave it to the agencies as far as, do their own research, take a look at their own area, take a look at the trends. But as far as the timing of the escalation rate, some of the standard ways to do it, you escalate it to the mid-year of that task. For example, your construction is, 1 year in 2026. You escalate it to the mid-year of 2026. That's what you typically would do for escalation. But we do leave it to the agencies to kind of figure out their escalation rates.
Thank you, Cirillo. Next question comes from Jerome Marquez. He asks, are funding amounts associated with ATP ineligible items, can they be counted as part of the leverage funds?
Um, that one, I think I mentioned briefly that, like, if it is a non-eligible ATP item, for example, you are paving a vehicle travel lane, you're not able to utilize that as a leveraging fund. But here's an example. If you have a non-participating cost, right? But that non-participating cost can be considered ATP eligible, but you choose to put it as a non-participating because you want to do a leverage, right? That's where you're able to do it, right? But if it's a feature that's not eligible, as an ATP item, then you're not able to use it as leverage. And we do have supplemental guidance, and it will be linked in the application instructions as far as what is considered ATP eligible and ineligible. Anybody else in the? Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Amelia Conlin. She asks, early in the presentation, there was a slide that PSRs need to show project alternatives and cost. Is that required in the ATP application?
Good question. No, it's not a requirement for the ATP application. However, if your project does include alternatives, you should include them for review.
And I just want to, it does bolster your project that you've done a deeper dive, you've gone, if you've discussed and why you ruled those out and why your project that you are bringing forward is what's rising to the top.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Jerome Marquez. He asks, can repavement costs be separated between ATP eligible and ineligible? Can we designate repavement costs directly beneath the bike facility as an eligible cost, while designating repavement costs for a vehicle travel lane as ineligible?
Yeah, so I'll give an example, I guess, for this one. For example, you have a widening, but you're only widening a shoulder for a class 2, buffered class 2, and you're putting a sidewalk. So you'll probably need to do a saw cut and rebuild that, portion, and then add the pavement for the bike lane that conforms to the new sidewalk. So those are eligible items, right, for ATP. But if you're having to rehab the travel lane, anything on the travel lane that you have to rehab, like grind and an overlay or some type of rehab on the travel lane, that should be non-eligible item. But if you are, getting into a foot to do a saw cut and then build your widening for your shoulders, bike lanes, and then then those are eligible items.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Lindell Price. They ask, how is the crosswalk pavement handled? Rough pavement, rail tracks, etc., can result in wheelchair users and others getting stuck in the middle of the road. What are the ADA requirements for the crosswalks?
So for the crosswalks, those are eligible items, and it just needs to be justified, right? And it can be flagged if we're seeing that, at that project level, and it's being invoiced as, as eligible. That's when they would catch it. So just be clear as far as how you would separate those items. But if you're having to rebuild, ADA for slope and pedestrian crossing for railroad tracks, yeah, those are ATP eligible.
Thank you. Our next question also comes from Lindell Price. They ask, safety improvements is a reason given for ATP projects. However, off-road paths are not included in road safety data. If an off-road path is approved for ATP funding, how is its safety evaluated?
I can step in to help with this question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is a great question, Lindell. So in the ATP, we recognize that when it comes to collision data and safety data, it varies significantly throughout the state. So if an applicant is submitting a project where there is no collision data or lacking collision data, either because it's a brand new facility or the current infrastructure or lack of infrastructure is so unsafe that there is no walking or biking or rolling, any sort of active transportation activities taking place. As long as the applicant can explain why this project is a safety priority, they can still receive the full amount of points under this question. We included a secondary attachment field so that if an applicant would like to include something in addition to or despite the lack of heat or collision data, they can include any other sort of supporting documentation, whether that's survey results or utilizing other crowdsourcing platforms such as Street Story. So really, we want to leave it open, but as long as you are able to explain why this project is a safety priority, then you should have access to all of the safety points.
Also, I'd like to say that you can point to the safety data that's out on the parallel routes and saying these routes are going to the same destinations and there's these accidents or crashes here. And now if we give this other alternative safer route, that users will use it. But again, if your route's off on a totally different tangent, then that's a hard sell. But if you're able to come up with a location that is parallel and going to the same places, then it's easy to convince.
Thank you, Teresa. I forgot to mention that.
All right, thank you, Alika and Teresa. We have another comment from Lindell Price. They ask, question beyond the scope of this presentation. What effort is underway to incorporate mobility education? For example, age-appropriate educational wayfinding, walking, bicycling, transit use, driving, map reading, etc., into California school curriculum, rather than only as an add-on that places an extra demand on school personnel.
I can address this one, unless y'all at the podium have something to add to it. I'm happy, to have you add whatever information you have. Anya Allenbacher, I'm the ATP manager at the commission. This isn't really something that's in the purview of the ATP program. I think this might be a really great question for the Department of Education, maybe. I definitely think these are worthwhile things for school-age kids to be learning, especially as parts of Safe Routes to School. And I know that some of our non-infrastructure projects do include some of these elements when they're doing the Safe Routes to School. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Anya.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anya. I think, yeah, you provided a lot of similar things that I was going to say. But we do have great examples on our website of Safe Routes to School projects. I think the question was specifically asking like for statewide efforts. We're through the ATP program can show you what cities, counties, and regions have decided to do. But as far as a statewide effort, I agree with Anya. That question would be great to have with the Department of Education. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We have one additional comment from Lindell Price. This is not a question, so I don't believe a response is necessary. They note, good job addressing elevation. In a presentation on a proposed courthouse in Placerville, plans of the site showed a multi-use path that the presenters seemed to believe would provide convenient access to the site. However, the intersection from which they proposed accessing the path was at least 12 feet below the path. So thank you for that comment, Lindell. Our next question comes from Andrew Camacho. He asked, concerning the cost estimate, is there a reference to look up what is considered ATP eligible and non-eligible items?
Yeah, I think I mentioned just briefly that there is a supplemental guidance that will be provided with the application as far as ATP eligible and ineligible. And I think it's already in our Caltrans ATP website as well.
Thank you, Cirillo. Our next question comes from Greg Jaquez. He asks, can you provide a more detailed explanation of how Conservation Corps costs are represented on the engineer's estimate form?
Yeah. Jaden, is there a way to go back to
Yeah,
slide?
yeah, absolutely. Give me 1 second.
1 second, okay. Just I'm gonna look
Bear
for.
with me while we slide back through here.
I think it may be 45
Okay.
or 45 or 46 would be good.
Here's 45.
Okay, maybe 46 would
Okay.
be better. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so this is an example. Hopefully you're able to see the screen here. So these are an example. It's not in there, right? But just to the right of the ATP ineligible in the red, so it's purple. So you would put a percent of what the conservation on the, oh yeah, oh there's one at the very end. Sorry. So for this example, they're able to do the clearing and grubbing. So you put 100% there. So during application, while you're finalizing, there's an instruction to reach out to your core, and they sometimes and just sometimes they will let you know what type of activity they're able to do, and sometimes they're unable to say what type of activity. It depends on how your coordination goes. I recommend sending a draft of this estimate to them and see what type of work they're able to do. So if they provide you with the work, and just clarify, just put the percentage there of the item that they're able to participate in, and that's it. And if they said they can perform the work but can't confirm the work, then it's okay to not include that right now. But it is expected, it's going to be reviewed in the application. If it says, oh, they can participate, and then you do not utilize them in construction, that would be a question. Yeah, but um, yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you, Cirillo. Our next question comes from Dimitri Williams. He asks, similar to the SB1 programs, is there a Caltrans nomination process for ATP proposals?
There we go. Yes, there is a Caltrans nomination process.
All right, thank you,
Yeah.
Ali.
Okay.
All right, and our final online written question comes from Tyrese Lee. He asks, can you clarify why feasibility studies aren't eligible under ATP, even when they're a critical next step in our county's adopted active transportation plan? Our expressway corridors need this feasibility study to define actual bike ped projects. What's the recommended path to bridge that gap before applying to the ATP?
According to PSR equivalent process, the plans as well as the documents must be beyond the conceptual design, which includes a feasibility study. So more detailed examples as well as a design effort need to be done, at least a 30% design.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. So PSR, right? This level is it's a programming document. So you're able to find out cost, schedule, um, scope. So with the feasibility, sometimes it's hard because some feasibility studies can be more advanced than others. So it just depends. Maybe that feasibility study just needs a little more work so it can become a programming document. So take a look at keep that in mind.
And I would say the bridging tool is a plan. So, I mean, so you're going to be looking at more than just this one fabulous need that you have, but actually going out, doing either a walking, biking, safe route to school or ATP plan will capture a whole lot of needs and get a whole lot of input.
Maybe wanted to circle back. So it sounds like they already have a plan and they're wanting to know where they can get funding to do a feasibility study. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll reread that question. So Tyrese asks, can you clarify why feasibility studies aren't eligible under the ATP, even when they're a critical next step in our county's adopted active transportation plan? Our expressway corridors need this feasibility study to define actual bike and ped projects, which is the recommended path to bridge that gap before applying to the ATP.
I don't know if. Yeah, so it sounds like they have a plan. So
Yeah, I think they're really close probably. If they have a feasibility study, maybe they just need to look at the requirements of this PSR equivalent and then utilize that to apply. Because if there's a lot of times there's a feasibility study, they've done a lot of the work. Maybe you just need to package it so it becomes a programming document, so cost, schedule, scope for a project. Because the feasibility study might be for an entire region or citywide or something, but they need to chop off the project.
yeah, it sounds like they're saying though, if we're not going to help them pay for that feasibility, if the ATP program is not going to pay for that, what programs? Or yeah, I think they're wanting to know, okay, if we can't get it funded through the ATP, where could we get that work funded for? And I don't know if I have the answer to that. So maybe this is something we follow up. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe Jaden, this could be a follow-up action item. We could look into this a little bit further. But yeah, I think for all of us, we're aware of what the ATP can fund. So as far as
Yeah.
items that, yeah.
And Allie, I'll just add that I'm not aware of any commission programs that fund feasibility studies. All of our programs, as Elijah said, fund projects that are past that point and are, for the ATP, because we fund environmental, they're at 30% design and they're ready to start environmental, or, are further along. So, yeah, I don't know is my short answer.
All right, thank you so much. That concludes all of our online written comments. If you do have any additional comments or questions online, please feel free to type them in the Q&A or raise your hand. But next, we will now move to any comments or questions in the room. And as a reminder, please state your name and the agency you're representing.
How are you? Good morning. Those that are home with their fuzzy slippers, they got the head start on us. So I was anxious to come up and ask a question. With respect to the feasibility study, in our case with District 5, we did effectively work with their planning team to secure state-sponsored PID resources. So they went through the PSR checklist for cap tie alignment and that whole side of things, and we're able to capture state PID resources to do a state-sponsored feasibility study for one of our active transportation corridors. So that was one way to perhaps seek resources to accomplish that task. I didn't hear anything about maintenance agreements with respect to the PSR equivalent, and to what that's a question I have, because I think a lot of folks definitely at the district talk to the local agencies about maintenance agreements, and to what level that is a mandatory statement, commitment of maintaining that infrastructure after it's constructed. So that's a question I have. And I just also wanted to inquire with respect to the rubric that was shown on scoring on the, I don't know if that was intended to show the rubric on the scoring of how effective the project was scoped. But if you're coming in with all pre-construction paid for and you're only seeking, not only seeking, you're seeking construction, and you've accomplished, in theory, all the stakeholder engagement, everything has been dialed in. Is that, from the rubric perspective, is that the maximum score? And then equivalent efforts made by those seeking pre-construction monies and the whole gamut of phases, they really can't achieve the maximum score, because those that have actually done all the work would achieve the maximum score in that respect.
We can answer the maintenance agreement first. So it is recommended, as I mentioned earlier, engage with the schedule. I'll give you an example, right? We'll probably deal with it. Maybe two cities with a traffic signal, and that would be an example that you need a co-op or maintenance agreement. Who maintains that traffic signal, right? And who
Right.
manages that? So that would be recommended. That would be, identified, and it could be something that, we rely on the agency to let us know, because the evaluators will not be from there typically. They would be from a different region typically. So it would be good to have that in one of the attachments if there's any communication, or at least an agreement, general agreement for some type of co-op or maintenance, or if there's any partnerships, right? That would be good. Um, do you have anything to add as far as the maintenance agreements or?
Yeah, I have a quick thing to add. Thank you. Good question. And Cirillo, thank you for answering that. One additional thing I'll add, if there are agreements, make sure the agencies include in Part K of the application for additional information and narrative. That's where to be reviewed by reviewers. So
Very
thank you.
good.
Teresa.
And just the ATP requires that once you get this funding, that facility be operational for 20 years. So that, I mean, so that if there's not someone else that you're going to be able to point the maintenance of the general facility, then that's falling to you and is expected to happen.
And I just want to thank you for this particular workshop. And I think it should be required listening for all of our member agencies before they apply. And before I think SLOCOG would write a letter of support. I don't know if you have this recorded, this particular meeting. So I think we're going to ask that they sit down and listen to step by step what you went through today. So thank you so much. You bet.
And for the next question, Jaden, the CTC team, we may need your assistance on that one, because it does deal with evaluators and scoring rubric, as far as, if they're only doing construction only, how are they going to get scored as far as that rubric is?
Right. I see Anya came on the line. Anya, did you have a comment to add to that?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? I may
I
have
think,
gotten lost.
yeah, I can try, and then you can add to it. So if they completed the pre-construction phases and applied for construction only, in the scoring rubric, if there's a number or a score for, the scope, plans, or a layout, would they be getting the full score on that? Is it expected that they would get the full scores if they already have PSNE cleared right away, and PNED cleared, and final PSNE ready to go?
Okay. Yeah. So because it's scope, plan, and deliverability, it takes into account all three. So I mean, if you get all three, are great and perfect, then yeah, you would get the full score. Where a project applying only for construction would really kind of rate higher or rise to the top is at the end of our funding line. So if it's one of the projects that is at the end score of where we're able to fund, like where our funding capacity ends, at that point, the projects that all have the same score, they're in our guidelines. We have the additional criteria that will be a tiebreaker, basically. And one of the criteria in our tiebreaker scoring is deliverability. So a project that has already completed environmental and has right of way and is ready to go into construction would kind of rise to the top in that scenario. That's where that type of project would do better than others, I guess.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
I was just going to say too that along with what Anya said, sometimes, and this is more of an intangible thing in the scoring, that if a project has had done environmental and design, sometimes in the application, they can describe it more, because they're further along. So I think in a way for some evaluators, it's just they can see it more, which may lead to a higher score. May or may not.
Thank you, Lori. Looks like we have one additional comment in the room.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Hoyt with the Nevada County Transportation Commission. I appreciate the presentation today. I was hoping that you could maybe elaborate a little bit on slide 62, I believe it is. This is where you showed the schedule from PAD, PS&E right away through construction. And one of the situations I found myself in on a few projects is in the PAD phase where we were doing the environmental documentation, getting your permits established. There's often a level of design, preliminary engineering that's required in that phase to, fully document what impacts there are, your footprint of your project. And so would you maybe talk a little bit about what level of preliminary engineering, kind of reasonable costs, or what might trigger a red flag during a review? Just because I found myself in a position where there wasn't maybe enough PE put on there. And so we're scrambling to find, we need an extra few $100,000 to complete all the necessary engineering studies that are needed to get there.
All right. I think, yeah, so that's a tough one. Like it comes with, of course, sometimes you don't fully see ahead of time the impacts or the constraints on that location, right? So number one, assume federal funding, 1 million more. That's because that will add support costs already off the bat. And number two, if you're able to, during PSR, identify all the studies, like the anticipated studies that you're expecting, do that. And also, I would recommend reaching out to your district sometimes and ask them for like, hey, what's your typical ballpark cost for these things? Because they deal with that. And I think all the time in NCTC, yeah, you guys do good work, and I know you guys have a lot of project going on. With PNED, you're able to do plans and estimate, right?
Mhm.
And then you're trying to look at your preferred alternative at the very end and clear your environmental. And really just doing PSNR, is there any way for you to find out what are my environmental impacts really? What's my right of way railroad impacts? Those are what will cost a lot, I think, in that stage.
Utilities.
Utilities, right? Yeah, reaching out to your utility companies, sending your letters, finding out your cost sharing, and also, taking a look at your plans. So plans, I can't give an exact percent, but it needs to be in a way to where you can put together your plans and estimate, and your estimate would be what you're going to be moving forward. So support costs, right? Like we provide, I think in support costs up to 15% is the max, is the kind of standard for in our estimate. And if you need to go over that, you will have to provide a justification, and it's not guaranteed, right? But you are able to. Maybe you're expecting a lot more environmental studies for that portion, but to take a look at it, and PSR, like really just if there's a way, since you're in that area, if you have good working relationships with the stakeholders, if you're able to reach out to them and figure out like the costs or timelines, that would really help you. Because I do see where some of the costs can go up there, and unforeseen situations during P&ED of the project, and that's why it's we don't move forward to PS&E to right away before P&ED is cleared, because you can identify that there, and also depending on environmental document, right, you probably need to do required community engagement or open houses or a draft project report circulation. Take that into account as well, because that does cost. It adds cost. And you're pretty much doing 2 environmental documents, back to back. Yeah. You guys?
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I'll add, Aaron, also you can shift the remaining balance of your P&AD phase of balance over to PS&E. So that should hopefully help out with some projects if PS&E costs have escalated since your estimate.
All right, thank you for that.
All right, I don't see any more online questions or questions in the room, so I want to thank our presenters and our participants today. As a reminder, these materials, as well as a recording of this workshop, will be available on the CTC's website. And one last reminder, our next ATP Cycle 8 Central Workshop is scheduled for December 10th, and that will be a virtual workshop, and the registration link is available on the CTC's website, so please sign up for our next workshop. Thank you all, and that will conclude our workshop today.